Well, some of you may have seen on the local news this week, a group of our UCC pastors and leaders from our very own Grand West Association held a press conference in Grand Rapids. And that press conference was in support of the Dreamers, the more than 800,000 young immigrants who came here as minors and who are now facing the threat of deportation with the dismantling the DACA program. And at that press conference, our UCC pastors called upon Congress to pass a Clean Dream Act to protect these thousands of young people for whom America is their home. And at that press conference, Reverend Justo Gonzalez, our UCC Southwest Conference minister, reminded everyone that Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus were themselves refugees, undocumented people who were fleeing to escape persecution. Now, when I was watching that press conference online, I noticed people commenting below. And I have to say, most of the comments were very positive in support of our UCC pastors for speaking out in support of Dreamers. But as you can imagine, there were also some negative comments. And one of them was in all capital letters, and it said, "Churches should stay out of politics." And so my question for you this morning is, what is the role of the church when it comes to issues like these? What is the role? Are we to remain silent, or are we to speak out? Well, we have in the UCC a banner, which is behind me, that says what it means to be the church. We see the role of the church as protectors of the environment, as people who care for the poor, reject racism, fight for the powerless, and embrace diversity. And so, when our politicians and lawmakers policies that hurt the environment, we are called as the church not to keep silent, but to speak out. When our lawmakers enact laws that hurt the poor and the sick, it is our role to speak out. And when our elected officials say disparaging words about people because of their race or their country of origin, our role is not to remain silent. The role of the church is to speak truth. That is our calling as Christians. And that is what today's readings were all about, both the Old Testament reading that Mike read and the New Testament reading that I read. They're both about call. God was calling Samuel not once but 3 times before Samuel finally got it. He got the call. And Jesus was calling those very first apostles, saying, "Come, follow me." God is still calling you. Those of you who come here on a regular basis know that the motto of the United Church of Christ is, "God is still speaking." That's why I have commas on my stole, because it's not a period, it's a comma. God is still speaking. God is still calling everyone in this room, just like God called Samuel and Jesus called the apostles. You are being called. Call is the same as vocation. The word vocation comes from a Latin root, voco, voice. You are to follow your Christian calling, to go within, to hear that voice of the divine, the voice of spirit, and let that guide you, and to follow the way of Jesus, to go forth into the world and speak words of peace and justice and truth. That's what Jesus did. And that's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our lives begin to end the moment we become silent about things that matter." Our role is not to be silent. Our role is to speak truth. Martin Luther King's vocation was not a politician. That wasn't his calling. He was a Christian minister. That's what he saw as the motivating force behind the civil rights movement, was the way of Jesus. And in his book, Stride Toward Freedom, Dr. King talks about how Jesus inspired the civil rights movement. He said, "A basic philosophy guides our movement. Some refer to it as nonviolent resistance, non-cooperation, and passive resistance. But in the early days of the movement, none of those expressions was mentioned. The phrase most often heard was Christian love. It was the Sermon on the Mount, rather than the doctrine of passive resistance, that initially inspired us to take action. It was Jesus of Nazareth that stirred us to protest with the creative weapon of love. Nonviolent resistance emerged as the technique of the movement, while Christian love served as the regulating idea. In other words, Christ furnished the spirit and the motivation, while Gandhi furnished the method." That way of Martin, that way of Gandhi, that way of Jesus is the way of love. And we must make that the motivating factor of all the work we do for justice in 2018. Today's gospel passage could not be more timely. You all laughed when I read what Nathanael had to say when he first heard about Jesus. He said very degradingly, "Can anything good come out of a place like Nazareth?" And it reminds us what our president said a few days ago, wondering if anything good could come out of places like Haiti and African countries. Yesterday, our UCC president, the Reverend John Dorhauer, and our national officers released a statement on behalf of the United Church of Christ that they encourage us to read to you today. The United Church of Christ believes it is called into being to express fully the love of God, most powerfully known to us in Jesus. We believe our mission is to build a just world for all people. We cannot remain true to such a calling and be silent in the face of racist language, especially when it comes from the highest office in the land. Therefore, we condemn the language used by President Donald Trump in his recent outburst, and we call on him to apologize. As we all gather as a nation to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., a leader committed to racial harmony and justice, the United Church of Christ once again celebrates the rich tapestry of religious and racial diversity that America has become. We too dream of a land where all are equal and are judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The United Church of Christ is appalled at the president's speech. We denounce it as racist. We have grown weary of efforts to either apologize for or to normalize the bullying that we have all had to endure. We are an inclusive denomination, and we affirm the dignity and full humanity of people of all nations. We are asking for the president for an apology. A broken, divided nation will not fully heal without it. We are committed to building bridges of peace and understanding, of participating in the exchange of a love that can heal all wounds and bind together broken communities. Words of understanding and remorse are, we believe, a critical and a necessary step in helping this nation heal from this new wound. Signed, Reverend John Dorhauer, President of the United Church of Christ, and the national officers of the United Church of Christ. That's what it means to be the church. That's our role. The United Church of Christ leadership could have said, oh, we don't want to upset any of our parishioners. We don't want anybody to not come to the UCC anymore because we don't want to ruffle any feathers. But our role isn't to remain silent. Our role of the church is to speak truth, and that will ruffle feathers. Martin Luther King ruffled feathers. Jesus ruffled feathers. They upset the powers that be. And because of that, both of those men were arrested and jailed and ultimately silenced. But they weren't really silenced. They weren't. Their light, their spirit, and their voice lives on in us. And so it is our calling, our voice, to speak their truth out into the world. Both of those men had a vision, a dream. Martin Luther King called that the beloved community. He had this vision of this world, this beloved community, and Jesus had the same vision. Jesus called it building the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now, for Martin Luther King, this beloved community wasn't some ideal that couldn't be attained. For him, it was a very realistic and attainable goal in his lifetime. And as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, his lifetime was our lifetime. He would have been 89 years old tomorrow. He's a contemporary of ours. Sometimes we forget that because he's in the history books and we see footage that's in black and white. We hear kind of grainy audio tapes. But he is a contemporary of ours. His lifetime is our lifetime. We are the ones he was calling upon to build the beloved community, and he believed it was attainable in our lifetimes. Not some lofty goal, but something that could actually be achieved. And I believe that too. Of building the beloved community, Dr. King wrote, "Our goal is to create a beloved community, for love builds up and unites. Hate tears down and destroys. The aftermath of the fight fire with fire method is bitterness and chaos. The aftermath of the love method is the creation of the beloved community. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And it is this love that will bring about miracles." Miracles. You know that you are miracle workers. I've told you this before. Jesus said to us, "You are the light of the world, and everything I've done, you can do." And then he added, "These things and greater." We are the miracle workers, and we are the ones who in 2018 will continue to go forth and effect change in our nation and in our world. And they will know